Coogs House. It is officially official. The Colorado Buffaloes and one Coach Prime Deion Sanders are back in the Big 12. That's good news for the conference, but what's that mean for Houston? What could be coming next?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater came to step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way we can lay us on the Cougs into your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. And welcome back to the YouTube channel, because it is good to see you again. Obviously, hit subscribe. We're doing the same thing. We're giving something away every 250 subscribers. We're giving away more hats. We've got tan, we've got navy, we've got black hats, the Locked On the side, and all that kind of stuff, all that good stuff. So subscribe down below and then comment to let us know that you are in the contest. If you're all expansion talked out and don't want to after hearing this episode, tell us down below if you consider an Oreo 1 cookie or 2. All right, so today's episode is talking about expansion and the biggest news of the day. Yes, Colorado is officially in the conference. We did wait till it was official to record for a number of reasons, but anyway, it's officially official. So that's going to be the first segment. Is what happened with Colorado, what's going on there, and what does Colorado do for Houston? The second segment is there are a number of reports from big names saying that they are not coming alone, that there will be more coming in, and so we'll be as up to date as we can be at the time of this recording. In the second segment. And the third segment, I want to talk about this expansion idea as a whole, and kind of what happens with Houston, good, bad, or in between, because I've tried to kind of thread that through this each time we talk about this, because I think there's cause for concern, but also cause for optimism. I can speak, I promise. Let's jump on and talk about Colorado. Now, the vote was unanimous, and at just after 4 o'clock Central Time, when the Board of Regents had a public conversation, it was like a Zoom call in public, Chancellor Philip DiStefano at Colorado Board of Regents said that a move to the Big 12 will set up Colorado for long-term stability and will also provide added exposure. He also would then finish up with, "We think the time has come for us to change conferences. They're moving to the Big 12. Brett Yormark and the Big 12 tweeted out and put across all their social medias and emails and things like that the "I'm back" graphic, like Michael Jordan did back when he returned the Bulls from baseball. It is official. It looks like the vote was unanimous. This vote happened on Thursday after meetings with the Pac-12 on Wednesday. I think left a lot of people disappointed. Now, I think what's interesting is this all comes down to the Big 12 and taking a chance and doing things like adding Houston just over, 18 months ago? It's been, my timelines are all thrown off. It's been the last 2 years, right? And suddenly that moved a couple years ago, right, to add those 4 schools that were, Big 12 is adding a bunch of group of 5 schools. They're going to die with Texas and Oklahoma gone and blah, 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 blah. And all those kinds of things happening in the time since. A, those people saying that they just look silly, but B, all of the moves the Big 12 has made since then have proven to be the moves that they had to make to survive, and frankly, the moves that the Pac-12 did not make to survive, right? The Pac-12 saw what the Big Ten got in their media deal and thought that they should get the same. Consensus was that they were never going to get the same, right? Especially with USC and UCLA leaving just a year ago, announcing they're leaving the Pac-12 for the Big Ten, right? Meanwhile, the Big 12 took a media deal that got them $31.7 million minimum TV deal per school. And some would say, like, they signed that deal really early. Like, maybe they could have waited to see if more bigger names came in, and instead they just went ahead and signed it and started operating as if that was the dollar amount to beat, and the Pac-12 could never beat it. And then the Big 12 could then go out and get different schools to join the conference because they signed it as a pro rata deal. So what they're doing with that is every school that signs on gets the same, or it's not re-divvied up, right? Every school that signs on will get $31.7 million from a combination of ESPN and Fox. we've heard Brett Yormark say he wants to go coast to coast, and Colorado is admittedly not on a coast, but it does indicate a lot of expansion within the conference, or a lot of movement within the conference, because that brings the Pac-12 down to a total of 9 schools moving forward in 2024, and suddenly they're just falling apart. They're not going to have San Diego State. It doesn't look like in the very near future. Might be shortly thereafter. And what is the Pac-12 going to do? Seems to be a real question. That's going to be in the second segment. But I want to talk some about Colorado specifically and what they do for the Big 12, and more specifically, Houston, right? That got through all the news there. But what the Colorado Buffaloes do for Houston is interesting because, frankly, in the dozen years since Colorado left the Big 12, they've been awful. Right, they have 2 winning seasons in that window. They've been a doormat in the Pac-12, and they just went and threw a bunch of money at Deion Sanders, and he pulled in a bunch of transfers, including our Alden McCaskill, and we both know he's a good running back. But at the end of the day, they weren't exactly the marquee brand. What they are more for the Big 12 in Houston is a domino to take out competition. That is the Pac-12. As far as what they do coming into the Big 12, I kind of like it as Houston because, A, there's a revenge factor. If Houston were to get to play, theoretically, Alton and Coach Prime in 2024, I think there'd be a lot of fun, I hope it stays PG, trash talk and banter between the two universities after what was going on with Alton McCaskill this past spring. Now, that's not to say anyone's mad at Alton necessarily, but there's a sports level of like trash talking to it that is, I think, fun and part of fandom. Now, I hope it doesn't ever go past that. I'm not saying it should ever go past that, but I think that's an interesting way that this could happen. The other thing is that Deion in Colorado will be, and have already been in, Texas recruiting a lot of the same kids. You're going to start seeing Colorado as a player for kids in Houston and things like that. And Coach Prime is proven to be a good recruiter. That's going to be interesting to watch and see happen, because suddenly kids are going to be on those final top 5 or top 7 or top 3 graphics, choosing between the Colorados and the Houstons. It'll be kind of the same caliber of athletes, and then suddenly you have some real recruiting battles happening. I'd say I'm excited about this. And just yesterday's episode that I commented in the bonus part afterwards, like, Colorado's a team I would like to play, as far as like a Pac-12 team to play. I think this whole like hype train around the Deion thing, I don't know how long he's there for, but while he is there, it's always fun to squash that. And then because I think he's just a career climber, and no shame on that, I just think that he won't be there that long. Once he leaves and they go back to being that kind of doormat they've been for the last dozen years, I'm cool with having the win every week. Right, like I'm not that upset about that either. It pulls the Big 12 into another state, which adds to the media market dollar amount for 2030-31. When they redo the Big 12 deal, it pulls the Big 12 into another market, being like a city market like Denver. Boulder's a suburb kind of Denver, right? It's kind of the same area. I think that's a big deal too. Frankly, the occasional road trip to Denver to get out of the Texas heat's not the worst thing. I think those are all good signs. I do think that you'll see Deion more active in the Big 12, recruiting Texas and Oklahoma and Louisiana and things like that. But on the whole, I'd say adding Colorado is a good thing for Houston because, A, the competitiveness with Deion's fun. And like I said, I do think that there will be, we'll say, a future, I don't want to say how far, but a future where Colorado's back to not being very good. And we both know, I should say, not we all, but we both know that Pandora's box has been open when it comes to Houston. Houston's going to continue to grow and explode, and that Big 12 resources, Big 12 resources will only continue to push Houston into that upper echelon that we both know it can be, right? It's a sleeping giant. It is a big-time football program now in the heart of the best recruiting hotbed you could imagine being in. It is big time. The facilities are coming, right? It is all starting to build and snowball. And those things could, like Colorado coming down off the Deion thing as Houston's going up with their money, could time up just right to make it a really nice, we'll say, Dana Holgerson said at Big 12 Media Days, there are no layups. Colorado could be that layup very, very soon. I want to talk more about what this means for a broader landscape of things too. And I also think that may be the more interesting impact on Houston But first, let's talk about adding people to your team, just like the Big 12 just did, because these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Now, if you can find a player Deion Sanders to add to your team, you should do it. Coach, we'll talk about how long they're sticking around, but a player Deion Sanders, you want to add that guy to your team. And if you're the Big 12, you want to add a bunch of those West Coast guys to your team as well. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right. So I said in the second segment, I talked some about other schools because major outlets and the reporters for those outlets have pushed that Colorado is not going to do this alone. Clearly, the meeting on Wednesday in which ADs and presidents, things like left the Pac-12 meeting and were disappointed in whatever news there was or the lack of news there was, leads people to believe that these schools are not going to wait around to see what happens, because as it currently stands, a year from now, their games are not on TV, right? Like they're waiting on something to happen that continues to not happen. And further, it looks more and more likely that whatever does happen, whether it's the CW talk that was going to happen, PBS Kids, whatever they're going to be on, is not going to break the $31.7 million minimum they would get for being in the Big 12. And Brett Yormark has been very open. I mean, he said open for business this time a year ago. Like, this is a thing that he wants to happen. You're seeing rumors of Oregon, Washington, Utah, and Arizona to different substantial levels, all being talked about. Obviously, the Big 12 would love Oregon and Washington. Those are two giant brands. And if you had to pick one, you'd obviously pick Oregon because it's the de facto Nike university, right? Phil Knight's alma mater and all the money he pushes in, and that's why they have all the... I will say, everything you read and see over the weekend about Oregon, Washington, Utah, Arizona, and all of the schools in the Pac-12, they should be calling Big 12 offices, right? You're going to see a lot of schools are calling Big 12 offices because they need to be, because the future of the Pac-12 is up in the air, and they need to be doing their due diligence and be checking for contingency plans for if the bottom falls out of the Pac-12, right? Things like this don't take a long time to fall apart, and they might already be falling. If the Pac-12 ceases to exist in 2024, much like the Southwest Conference did to Houston back in the mid-90s, those schools can't stand not having anywhere to be. They're going to need a plan. They're going to call the Big 12. They're going to call the Big 10. They're going to call the SEC. They're going to call conferences that may not make geographic sense, even like the SEC, just to make sure they're seeing what all of their options are. And I'm here to tell you, Brett Yormark, as a salesman, will be selling the best option. And that's the thing that's interesting here, is that when you hear those calls, that's just going to go back and forth. Also, like Oregon, I think threw some people a bit of a wrench by around the same time as Colorado announcing they're going to have their public Board of Regents meeting, in which they did announce that they were moving to the Big 12. Oregon put out a press release that they're going to have their own meeting within athletics. That meeting led to the extension of their football coach. He's making like $7 million a year now, which does not directly mean they're joining the Big 12 or anything like that, but it does mean they need some TV money, because they need to use that money to pay that coach all that money, right? So like things are starting to trickle there. And I think the biggest thing about Colorado joining them means that they have to add someone else, is that it doesn't make logical sense for the Big 12 to be at an odd number as far as the football divisions or pods would go. They're going to stay at an even number, and who do they add? So if they're going to add someone, you look at the rest of the Pac-12, because that conference is falling apart a little bit, or it looks like it could very quickly fall apart. For what it's worth, back in the Oregon smoke, Phil Knight and Brett Yormark do know each other as far as billionaire circles go, and the business circles from when Brett Yormark was in pro sports. And I guess they did meet in the summer of 2022, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been 21, but I thought it was 22. And Phil Knight loves that university, and if joining the Big 12 is better for the athletic program, he's going to make sure they do it. He's got the money and the support to do that if he so sees fit, right? And so that's something to keep in touch with there. I I did see Oregon beat writers online because I was trying to see what they were saying about the Big 12. We're saying the Pac-12 is scrambling to look to add new members and could trade up as far as like trying to find, how quickly can they pull in the UNLVs, the San Diego States, Gonzagas, those kinds of things. Gonzaga would be a basketball only thing, obviously, but you got me, right? Or not a non-football thing, I should say. So we'll see. Those Oregon people are reporting that, and so we'll see what they go with that. The interesting one to me, while it's not the same dollar as Oregon, and it's not exactly West Coast, although from a market perspective, it kind of is. It's not just not on the water in the same way, but Arizona, because we've seen the president and the athletic director both make comments directly saying this is a dollars and cents deal. Arizona is very, very open that this is just about money to them. They're going to play who they're going to play. The state has officially said that they and Arizona State do not have to move together. Arizona is just looking for the highest dollar amount. And Colorado's actions in the last 48 hours make it very clear the better dollar amount is almost certainly going to be the Big 12. If for no other reason, then there is no current Pac-12 dollar amount. Right. And so Arizona is a very serious possibility. Now, am I connecting stories over the course of the last 6 months and somewhat aggregating to get to that point? Sure. But I think that if I'm reading between lines there and people are reporting that, again, the ESPNs, the Foxes, the CBS of the world are saying that their reporters are saying Colorado not be alone. I think Arizona feels like a very natural choice because it's in their four-corner school. It's not a big jump from being in Utah with BYU or being in Colorado with Colorado. It's not a big jump in any direction. It's just the next state over, right? Slightly south and over, right? It also, for what it's worth, is a Power 5 school, so they bring in that. They have football and basketball and do very well in both, relatively speaking. And we know Yormark likes the basketball programs, and I think Arizona's very strong in that as far as those kinds of things go. I think that that's a very good fit, and I think that if I'm piecing stories of the last 6 or 8 months together, that might almost be more likely than Oregon. I think personally, myself and the conference would both like Oregon more because it would make the conference more money. In the same way it's fun to beat Texas and shut them up, it's fun to beat Oregon and shut them up, and right? But Arizona is a very, very good option, and I could see it happening because of that. The other thing I have to say is, if we're looking for a partner for Colorado, because the odd number doesn't make sense, because people keep saying, again, reputable people keep saying that they're not coming alone. We know Brett Yormark likes UConn. We know Brett Yormark likes the Northeast. We know Brett Yormark likes big markets, and UConn has a big market. It gets the Big 12 into a different part of the country that the Big 12 is not in currently. Big 12 is kind of heading that direction with West Virginia 12 years ago, and Cincinnati they just added when they added Houston, and they're kind of moving in that direction. But I think that the play here is, if no other if the Pac-12 saves the day and it doesn't quite crumble or whatever, and only Colorado leaves, and they pull in San Diego State, and they pull in somebody, and they get themselves back to a 10 or 12 team conference, and they survive this deal, right? Colorado comes to the Big 12. We need an even number. Make it a basketball only thing because UConn doesn't have football, and that might change the dollars and cents. But suddenly you have a basketball conference that, when you're redoing deals in 2030, 31 and talking about things, then you're looking at Brett Yormark has mentioned having a football deal and a basketball TV deal separate from one another. You're looking at adding basketball programs like UConn and Houston and Cincinnati to what was already the best conference in basketball. That's a lot of dollars for Houston. And the big deal for Houston is all of those lots of dollars goes into facilities, goes into coaching contracts, right? Goes into recruiting budgets, goes into the programs themselves. And I'm telling you guys, I cannot express how significant that will be in the 5 to 8 year window for building up the Houston Cougar programs. We're going to see a lot more happen with them. In the third segment, I do want to address, though, that while some of these things are happening that are good, there are also some problematic things. And so, anyway, let's just jump into the third segment. For Houston, the good, right? The product is only getting more valuable. Houston is in that value, and Houston is solidly in that value. We heard Brett Yormark say that, at Big 12 Media Days, right? He went on and on about Houston. He loves the market, loves Big City, loves what they bring in basketball, loves what they can bring in football, loves that Dana's familiar with the conference, loves those things, right? He knows that it's, as you build a bigger conference, you also only get more units to move. And this is both Yormark and Houston gaining from this, but you have more teams that can make it to bowl games. The whole conference gets a split on bowl games. More teams that can make it to the college football playoff. The whole conference every school in the conference gets paybacks on the college football playoff. Like everyone in the Big 12 last year got money for TCU making it to the national championship game, right? Theoretically, the more teams you have and more options you have getting there and so on, right? The more teams you have, like the UConns and stuff like that, the more teams will make March Madness. The whole conference gets kickbacks on having teams in March Madness. So all of those things, what you call in the financial word units, right? Like units in this, units in that, like adding all of these schools adds more units coming back and paying out schools like Houston. And again, when Houston's going from making roughly $8 million, Houston's going to be making between 40, 45, and like top end being $50 million a year from TV and units like that, like all those things. That's a big difference. And the investment's going to be very, very clear, very, very fast. You'll see it in the football facility. They're starting as soon as home football games are done this season, right? As soon as they've gotten some of the money and the football team is done playing in that stadium, they're putting shovels in the ground because it's going to start very quickly, right? Those are good things, right? Bluntly, Colorado specifically, I mentioned that everyone's thinking this Deion thing is going to work out, but for much of their history in football, they've been kind of a pushover. And admittedly, having a Power 5 pushover team, having a layup in the conference as a whole, right, wouldn't be the worst thing. I don't know that there'll be a layup while Deion's there, and maybe he built something. Maybe he proved me wrong and built something long lasting. But if he doesn't, it's not the worst thing to have a layup in the conference either. The bad here, okay, there are bad things here. We want Houston to build up the University of Houston's talent base with Houston area kids as recruits. I do think this opens up Houston as a recruit market. I think, I know Deion and Colorado were already coming into the state of Texas, but I think this gives them a real good trump card. And a lot of kids, the deal if they went to Colorado, be like, well, my family will never see me play because I'm playing in Colorado and further west the rest of my life, and the rest of my college career, what have you. And now we can say, actually, you're going to play 4 games a year in Texas, or what, 4 games every 2 years, or whatever it is, right? However the home and homes work out and all that. I worry about that. Now, maybe I'm being silly, maybe I'm being whatever, but I worry about that from recruiting kids. I think that is opening something up. I also think it's like Deion, Colorado already used Texas. I really think it's opening something up with the continued expansion afterwards, right? Houston is a recruiting hotbed in other schools. We already have to deal with Texas and Texas A&M and LSU and stuff like that, right? Opening that up to other schools and expansion might hurt the talent recruiting the pool some. It does mean we get to go to their places and find their kids too and say, hey, we're going to play, we'll play in Colorado once a year, every other year or whatever. Like those things happen, sure. But we know Houston's a better talent base, so that does worry me. That's admittedly a recruiting problem, and if you have a good recruiting staff, you can probably negate it. I do worry about those kinds of things. I think about things too, like traveling as fans. Like the first set of trips to all these places will be fun, but going to and from, these long 20-hour road trips or 4-hour flights that are not cheap, right? Doing all this over and over again can get tiresome and laborious. The more years you do it. So there needs to be some sort of divisions and pods. And frankly, if you're going to make these conferences into divisions and pods, if you do it by region, I don't think it's evenly like Houston gets stuck in the toughest region by far, right? And so that's, I think, something that's worth keeping in mind is like, how do we, if we split it up into pods or divisions, right? In the SEC, they tried that, and the SEC West is much better than the SEC East, with the exception of like Georgia the last couple of years, right? Like that has not worked out well. The SEC West, the LSU's, the Alabamas, those teams have been much more dominant, with the exception of last 2 years, right? So we'll see. And frankly, even after Georgia, the rest of the SEC East is still kind of like not the SEC West, but I digress. I think that potential divisional, we have to be intentional about how we do that, and that could be a drawback for Houston. I will say that the idea of adding schools to the conference, the negatives that could come, and the things that make me cautious are all things that are more unknowns than surefire things, right? It's unknown how this will impact people recruiting the city of Houston, right? We know that it'll impact it some, but is it necessarily going to be as bad and as big and bad as I think it is? Who knows, right? We all know that it's going to add a lot of travel, and they're probably split at the conference as some sort of way to play football games because you just can't play everybody all the time. If they end up being a 16-team conference, you just can't play everybody, right? While I worry about what that could mean for the Cougs, we don't know how it's going to divide up yet, right? We'll see how those kind of things work out. I do think the money and what could come from the money is so good for Houston, they can't say no. And they can't vote against it, right? They're going to continue to vote to add more and more people. And so we're going to see more and more about what is coming. Now, I do look at these schools adding, and I just literally, because I'm trying to make sure I'm out to the latest news, doesn't look like anyone else has officially said they're coming outside of Colorado. So we'll continue to keep you updated on all of those things here at Locked On Cougs, because those things do impact the Houston Cougars. We'll be continuing to tell you what the latest reports are. Obviously, we are here for the fans and here to talk about things. But please make sure you follow me on, I want to say Twitter, but really Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, anything that you follow on social media. I'll be happy to talk about these kinds of things. I'll be posting about these kinds of things. I'll be following these kinds of things, and we'll be talking about it for about 20 to 30 minutes every day here at Locked On Cougs. You can find me at Painsworth 512, PAINSWORTH 512 on every place you go to social media. Happy to talk all things Houston Cougars, Rockets, Astros, the Texans, and this whole Oilers mess with the uniforms. I'm pissed about that, actually. If you're pissed too, tell me about it down below. Thank you so much for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. I'm going to recommend, as your second listen, not because the show may end when the Pac-12 ends, but I'm going to recommend that you go listen to Locked On Pac-12 as your second listen, because I think personally that Spencer is doing a great job covering what's happening over there with an unbiased eye. I think he's a West Coast guy, he's an Oregon guy, but with an unbiased eye. Some of that's probably because he's comfortable enough to know that Oregon's not going anywhere. It's just where they're going to end up playing their games. But go check out that show for your second listen. And remember, as an everydayer, if you made it this far in the podcast, make sure you throw hashtag everyday and ask any type of mailbag, any type of question you want to down below. We will do our best to answer them at the end of third segments. There were none of those yesterday. So maybe, we talked to Koo and those kind of things, so it got thrown off a little bit. But if you throw hashtag everydayer on a question in the commentary down below, because you made it this far and know that that's what you're supposed to do, I'll be answering those kinds of questions the best I can at the end of third segments throughout the show. So thank you all so much throughout the football season, I guess I should say, on the show. So thank you all so much for listening to Locked On Cougs and making Locked On Cougs your first listen today. Locked On Cougs is a proud Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Go Cougs. Oh, had trouble talking there at the end. Anyway, go Cougs.